Ikra Malik, and now I'm going to host you all. First of all, thank you, Dr. Adil, for that enlightening presentation. We'll now move into our first block of oral presentations, showcasing cutting-edge research from our brilliant contributors. Our first presenter is Iqra Ghulam Muhammad, who will present on assessment of microplastics in terrestrial and aquatic insects. Iqra, you may begin. Iqra Ghulam Muhammad, are you there?
Give 5 minutes. She is just setting the slides. Give 5 minutes. They are just sharing the screen.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Okay, I'm starting.
Okay, best of luck.
Please
Good
put
morning.
your slide on presentation mode.
Plastics and why should you care about them? Microplastics are tiny plastic particles smaller than 5 mm in any dimension. Some are visible, but many are so tiny they are essentially invisible. If I show you soil with microplastics, you won't see them because they are really small and mixed in. Basically, they build a very fabric of soil. But these aren't the smallest plastics, they break into even tinier nanoplastics, as small as viruses, which can pass through cell walls and interact with organisms. If we look at the sources of microplastics, there are main two sources out there. One is their intentional production in the form of tiny particles manufactured for products like cosmetics and industrial use, and the second is larger plastics breaking down into smaller ones over the time. When we picture plastic pollution, we often think of floating bottles in the ocean. However, the majority of plastic waste never makes it to the sea. Instead, much of it is ground down, burned, or processed, and some ends up right back on our farmlands. So the question is, where do these microplastics come from in our agricultural lands? In agriculture, microplastics come from all sorts of places, like plastic mulch films that break down into fields over time, fertilizers and pesticides with tiny plastic bits, irrigation pipes and sprinklers that shed particles, plus general plastic trash from packaging, gear, and even fibers from workers' clothes. Water channels can also bring them from city runoff, factories, or plastic plants. Wind carries airborne bits from far off cities, highways, or coasts. Sewage sludge fertilizers also has them from wastewater plants. So all of these things and many other are responsible for the presence of these microplastics in our agricultural systems. As we are discussing microplastics in agricultural lands, we cannot forget the small creatures roaming among them, and that are insects. It's fascinating to know that insects can ingest microplastics through their environment, like soil, water, and plants. Because these particles are pervasive in ecosystems and insects just cannot ignore them. So they eat them, and once ingested, microplastics can cause physical harm, like blocking digestive tracts, and can also lead to biochemical toxicity in them. Furthermore, discussing these particles in insect is crucial because agricultural fields are often areas where microplastics accumulate due to the use of plastic films, irrigation water, and even atmospheric deposition. This means that insects in these fields are likely to encounter microplastics more frequently, making them good indicators of pollution in agricultural environments. Okay, so having understood the importance of microplastics, let's now delve into the process of this research. Let me break down how we ran our study. First, we selected two districts, Toba Teksing and Faisalabad, covering a total area of about 104 kilometers. Within these two districts, we chose two types of fields, wheat and bursing. as both are key crops in Pakistan that are easy to sample from. To collect insects, we focused on both terrestrial and aquatic species. In the terrestrial fields, we set up pitfall traps and left them for about 7 days. For aquatic insects, we used dip nets in the adjacent water channels. Once we had collected enough insects, we carefully placed them in glass jars and immediately froze them to preserve their integrity. On screen, you can see all of the 7 species we collected. Upon arrival in the lab, we rinsed the insects with ultra pure water to remove contaminants. Next, we treated them with a mixture of potassium hydroxide and hydrogen peroxide, allowing incubation for about 5 days. After that, we neutralized the samples and filtered them to isolate any microplastics. Finally, we examined the residues under a microscope, identifying and classifying microplastic particles based on their morphological characteristics. We then confirmed their identity using FTIR spectroscopy and analyzed the spectra with open source software. Now that we have covered our methodology, let's look at the results of this study. We are going to discuss the findings across 4 main aspects: the shapes of microplastics, their chemical composition, the distribution across different insect species, and finally, the variation between terrestrial and aquatic habitats. But first, we have to understand the shape. The cotton ballworm shows polyethylene, polyamide, polystyrene, and polypropylene. The bar graph shows that polyethylene and polyamide have the largest share. In comparison, the minute tree fungus beetle primarily harbors polyethylene and polypropylene, while mayflies have polyethylene and polyamide. Water striders and water boatmen share an identical profile of polyethylene, polyamide, and polypropylene. In contrast, mosquitoes display the wide polymer variety including polyethylene, polyamide, polystyrene, polypropylene, and polyethylene tetraphthalate, polyester, and polymethyl methacrylate. With these individual profiles in a view, you can also look at the bar graph illustrating the collective microplastic composition across all species. Now that we have checked out the microplastic profile for each insect species, let's see how they stack up across different habitats. When we compared habitats based on the microplastics detected in them, aquatic habitats had way more polymer variety. We spotted all sorts of microplastics types there. Land habitats had less variety but high values of a few specific polymers. Cool thing is, even with these differences, one polymer was hands down the most common in both, proving it's everywhere, and that is polyethylene. As one of the most common types of microplastics in the environment, polyethylene's prevalence here aligns with broader trends. One major reason for its high percentage is its extensive use in packaging, plastic bags, bottles, and various single-use items. It is resistant to degradation, allowing it to persist and spread easily for a long time. Thus, our findings are consistent with typical observation in environmental studies. Now that we have seen these results, the most important question is, what does all of this actually mean? So we are going to interpret these findings into 4 main aspects. First, we will be talking about microplastic pollution extent, then their role in changing the soil, next impact on plants, and finally their impact on soil organisms. We all know that microplastic is a pollutant that has emerged as an international concern, and it's not going away. Every single piece of plastics you have ever touched, every bottle, bag, wrapper, still exists somewhere on our planet. It doesn't vanish, it just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, becoming what we call microplastics. And this isn't a distant problem. Research has now found these particles in the air we breathe, the deepest ocean trenches, on the peak of Mountain Everest, in our food like honey and meat, and most alarmingly inside us. In breast milks, placentas, testicles, and as recent shocking discoveries confirm, even in the human brain. And I don't think people understand the severity of this situation, as brain is the most protected organ in a human body. It is protected by a highly selective semi-permeable membrane that only allows essential nutrients and oxygen to pass through it. The fact that plastic particles cross this legendary defense is a major breach. Microplastics can cause chronic inflammation in the brain, which leads to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer and Parkinson's. And the most terrifying thing is, once microplastics cross this defense, there is no going back. You can clean a beach or filter water, but you cannot clean plastics out of your brain tissues. The exposure is likely permanent on an individual level. This realization also carries a psychological weight. The pollution is not just around us, it's now an uninvited permanent part of us. So the brutal truth is every single person on earth now has microplastics in their body. We have successfully coated the entire planet in a very light coating of plastics. Geologically, we have created this layer in a very short amount of time. So this problem is no longer just an ocean problem or a farmer's problem. It's a problem for everyone who share this planet. One of One other major factor that allows us to see the extent of microplastics is their role in the climate change. Every step of plastic's life, from their oil extraction to transport to facilities to refineries, every step is emitting a huge amount of greenhouse gases, and even in landfills, these plastics are emitted. Recent research is revealing that microplastics are more than just litter in the soil. They are actively changing its fundamental properties. Let me give you a few key examples. First, they disrupt the soil physical structure. Here we are going to look at the soil's infiltration rate and its aggregate size. Infiltration rate is the speed at which water enters the soil, and aggregates are those little clumps of soil. A 2021 study by Kim and colleagues found that polyethylene, a very common plastic, can reduce the soil's infiltration rate by over 11%. A similar study in 2020 by Zhou also reported soils are becoming worse at absorbing water due to microplastics' presence in them. It means soil is becoming more vulnerable to runoff and erosion. Why does this soil structure matter so much? Because it's the foundation of soil health. The size and stability of soil aggregates are critical. They influence everything from how much carbon the soil can store to how water and air move through it. In short, they dictate soil fertility. So when microplastics change these aggregates and infiltration rate, they are directly impacting the productivity of our farmlands. So to connect the dots, microplastics are degrading our agriculture soil, making it less fertile, more erodible, and less hospitable to the life that sustains it. This compromised soil then produces our food, and it becomes one of the major pathways for these same microplastics to enter our food chain and ultimately, as we have seen, into our own bodies. This degradation of the soil doesn't just stay in the ground, it has a direct and measurable impact on the plants growing in it. Microplastics can attack plant life at every stage. They can reduce seed germination, impair root growth, and impact the yield rate. A study in China on cotton showed losses of around 15% in the yield when plastic fragments were found in the topsoil. But the damage is more than just physical. Inside the plant, microplastics disrupt fundamental processes. Research shows they can limit a plant's ability to utilize essential nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which stunts its development. They can even interfere with photosynthesis itself, either by reducing light penetration or by damaging the plant's metabolism. This doesn't just hurt the plant, it threatens the base of food chains and global carbon cycling. The result is a clear pattern of suppressed growth. Studies on staples like wheat and spring onions showed widespread effects: reduced biomass, shorter plant height, and lower chlorophyll content. The bottom line, the bottom line threat is The bottom line is a threat to our food security. Experimental data shows yield reduction for key crops ranging from 11% to 25%. So from soil to the seedling to the harvest, microplastics are systematically undermining the very systems that feed us. Now, if microplastics are weakening plants, what happens to the creatures that depend on them? The evidence shows the contamination climbs the ladder, directly impacting insects both on land and in water. Our own research found quantifiable levels of microplastics, which aligns with the global pattern of harm. In aquatic ecosystems, insects like mosquitoes and which larvae ingest these particles, leading to malnutrition, developmental delays, and inflammation. On the land, exposure in species like honeybees and silkworms disrupt growth, behavior, and gut health, increasing long-term vulnerability. This isn't just a lab observation, it's a warning signal for our entire food system. These insects are not endpoints. They are prey, they are eaten by birds, amphibians, and other animals that form the next links in the chain. This risk was captured starkly in a headline from The Independent in UK, which read, "Scientists fear Britain's entire food chain is compromised as study finds microplastics in bugs." This headline perfectly summarizes the ultimate implication of the study. Finding microplastics in bug isn't just about the insects, it's about the magnification of this pollutant. If the base of the food web is contaminated on our farms, that contamination bioaccumulates, moving up through birds, through larger animals, and directly onto our plates. So, from water to land, microplastics are not just pollutants, they are physiological disruptors that threaten to compromise the integrity of agriculture ecosystems from the ground up. Thought we are the first generation to fully document this plastic infiltration, and we may be the last generation with a window to stop its worst effects. The question is no longer if microplastics are everywhere. The question is what are we going to do now that we know? Thank you.
Anyone has a question? You can ask her. Nobody have question? Okay, now go on. Thank you, Miss Iqra, for that enlightening presentation.